everyone, welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, U.S. voters have elected billionaire businessman Donald Trump to be their next president. Trump's straight talk and brash style help him get into the White House, but will it hurt U.S. relations abroad? And the United Nations is holding its yearly climate change conference in the Moroccan city of Barakat. Will world leaders honor their promises to implement difficult environmental reforms? And we start tonight's program in the United States, where the 2016 presidential election has just come to a close. Surprise victor was Republican nominee Donald Trump. His win brings an end to 8 years of Democratic rule in the U.S. and sets the country possibly on a very different path.
Amid scandal, bluster and insults, Donald Trump has won the presidency, a victory long seen as unlikely, even impossible. Speaking at the victory party in New York, Trump expressed gratitude towards Hillary Clinton and called for unity.
Hillary has worked very long and very hard over a long period of time, and we owe her a major debt of gratitude for her service to our country. I mean that very sincerely.
From the start, Trump's battle has repeatedly shattered the conventions of U.S. politics. This has been a campaign where the unexpected kept popping up. Boundaries of taste and truth were broken regularly, and it has revealed the deep divide that runs through American society.
Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. We have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people.
Unsurprisingly, this presidential election has been rife with China bashing. But from Ronald Reagan to Obama, tough rhetoric on China has usually only been a ploy to win the White House, and pragmatism is likely to be the eventual winner. And now, as the unexpected president prepares to step into the White House, a new page is about to be written.
And for more on the vote, I'm joined here first by Mr. Yang Xiyu, Senior Fellow at the China Institute of International Institution. Welcome to our program. It's a long day for you as well, sir. You were with us at the very beginning to see the whole process of the presidential election and the vote counting. What do you make now of this quite dramatic result?
Well, the surprising results means big changes in the United States. We will see a very unique the president of the United States. What will be the United States under the very unique president? That's the big question mark, not only to American people, but also to the whole world.
Certainly, to China, it's a very important issue because China and the United States certainly are two of the most important countries, some say, in the world. So what about that? Much impact to have on U.S.-China relations?
Yes, big influences. On one hand, some of American policy regarding to China, regarding to the region, will be adjusted. For example, rebalance strategy. That make a lot of imbalance in this region, a lot of troubles between U.S. and China. Such a strategy, rebalance strategy, will be changed under Trump. And on the other hand, some possible conflicts in trade area will increase compared with the previous 8 years.
We'll see what's going to happen. Of course, we're going to go into details about this discussion a bit later. For now, I'm also joined in Washington, D.C. by Ms. Lisa Osborne Ross, who is the managing director at APCO Worldwide. She is also a former senior Clinton administration official. Clinton, that it was Bill Clinton when President Clinton was in the White House. Ms. Ross, let me ask you about this. I understand you are quite close to the Clinton family. So how are you and many others supporting Secretary Clinton are absorbing the information right now or digesting the information now?
We are digesting the information and supporting her in the only way that she and Mr. Clinton would allow us to, and that is to accept the results of a democratic process, to move forward, to see what is in front of us, and to recognize that we are Americans first.
Ms. Clinton is likely to speak later in the hour. Once she speaks, we're going to carry her speech in our program as well. For now, let me go back to you, Ms. Ross. Further about that, Mr. Donald Trump, when he claimed the victory earlier today, Beijing time, of course, he talked about Mrs. Clinton as a public servant. There are his words. He said the country owes her a major debt of gratitude. And he also said she worked very hard, fought a long battle together with the family. Do you see much remarks of reconciliation between these two?
I think it is inevitable. I think that when the dust clears and we see how we're going to move forward, these are responsible adults, and I think that they will put the needs of the country in front of them, and they will move forward in a way that where we all can benefit. The United States is a global leader. We respect and really embrace our role in that capacity, and we will move forward as a nation. I'm confident of that.
If the two candidates could move forward together, but the rest of the country, will they be able to? That's a big question mark. We are seeing a very divided country, particularly when it comes to ideologies, the ideas, deglobalization or globalization, populism or elite. What do you think? Is the country likely under Donald Trump's leadership to be able to reconcile these huge?
I think we can, but I think it will take time.
What does it take?
I have said all along, it will take people being able to put their personal needs aside. It will take all of us being committed to looking at what is best for the nation. It will take us letting go of some of our fears, letting go of some of our biases, letting go of some of our anger, and determining and seeing that we have always been best when we operate together. But let me make this point. Before the election, I traveled to our offices, APCO Berlin, APCO Paris, APCO Brussels, APCO London, and in each one of those markets we had a very vibrant conversation about what is happening globally, and that is the difference between globalization and nativism. And they're struggling right now, and they are going neck and neck, and this is a necessary process. We are a global world. Globalization will rule the day. We will start to embrace in a much more effective way our global neighbors, but this is going to take time, and it's going to take a commitment from all parties to try to be the best people that we can be.
Well, Americans are trying to do some soul searching about exactly what's going on in your country. The rest of the world is looking at the plan that the president-elect is likely to have for next year, starting January the 20th. Remember in the speech Mr. Trump gave right after he claimed the success, he was talking about several things when it comes to international relations. Here's what he said. He said, we expect to have, quote, great relationships. He also said we want to have partnership, not conflict, not hostility. But of course, these are words. We understand politicians, they say words. How do they translate these words? It's another issue. So, Ms. Ross, from a deglobalization guy, talking about the rigged system at home and internationally, to an international partnership, he transformed himself, verbally at least, overnight. The thing is it possible for national politics?
It's not only possible, it's necessary. What you have highlighted
it's
are
probably
the various
necessary,
faces of
but
Donald
is
Trump.
it possible?
It's possible. Of course it's possible. We have to coexist. We will coexist. It will be a difficult process. The Donald Trump that spoke last night was not the Donald Trump that we saw throughout the election process. And the Donald Trump we saw last night was a better Donald Trump. And I think that it is not only in our best interest to believe that that is the case, but to actually make it happen. Recall also in the United States, there are 3 branches of government. They are equally important, and they are equally really powerful. We are structured so that we can balance each other out. Now, what you haven't talked about, which is significant, and that is that the Republican Party not only won the White House last night, but they won the House and they won the Senate. So, from if you look at it in a hopeful way, perhaps now we actually can get something done. That has been the problem with the last two administrations. You've had a president that has been at odds with Congress and with the Senate, and so now it is all controlled by one party. That's dangerous, but let's wait and see. Perhaps something actually can happen as a result.
Get something done. The important question is get what done, probably is even more important than just get something done. Let's have Robert Daly.
Is it what we want?
Who's also joining us from Washington, D.C. Robert Daly is director of the Kissinger Institute on China and the United States at the Wilson Center. I'm sure, Mr. Daly, you have been watching the whole process of the vote count together with your colleague, Ms. Ross, who spoke to us earlier. So let me ask you about some of details given in the speech by Mr. Trump when he became the president-elect. He talked about the building of infrastructure in your country. He said that is second to none when it comes to his task. That sounds quite familiar, isn't it? Talking about infrastructure building around the world, China also does that. But the question is, how is he likely to do that? He's never talked about that before.
Well, on the one hand, rebuilding America's infrastructure is a terrific place to start, because I think that you could find a bipartisan consensus around the need to do that. I think that the Democrats could potentially support that, work with Trump, and it could be a job creator. The question here is, how are you going to pay for it? It's a massive undertaking, and Donald Trump has also promised as president to cut taxes, including taxes on the wealthiest Americans. And most Republicans in Congress are still committed to no new taxes under the Grover-Norquist pledge. So on the one hand, infrastructure, terrific place to start, whether it had been a Clinton presidency or a Trump presidency, a good beginning, but how can he pay for it?
That question probably I can address it to the Chinese guest. China has been lending money to the United States for quite some time. Of course, I wouldn't let you to figure out exactly how the math was going to be done about the infrastructure. But what do you make, Mr. Yang from China, about these specific points Mr. Trump made as the president-elect?
Well, I think the point, the newly made point, you mentioned, you are right, never made during the campaign. The newly made point really contain a huge opportunity for the cooperation between China and the United States, between the two largest economies in the world in the infrastructure. Especially China has some advantages on that. Actually, China has tried for several times to do such a cooperation in the United States. So with the new president, I think there will be new opportunities for that.
Having said that, though, there are other questions that are extremely important. Mr. Daly and Ms. Ross, both of you are supposed to be categorized as, quote, the elite of your country. And through this presidential election, we see quite a difference between the opinions of the elites and the opinions of what they call the grassroots. How should we understand this very deep division? And what is likely to be so-called establishment and elite attitude toward this president-elect? Mr. Daly, go first.
Well, first I would be careful of buying into this idea that it's the grassroots against the elite too quickly. You're right that this is the emerging trope that the media is using, but I'd be careful. I don't think that the grassroots concerns, the concerns of primarily white but non-college educated blue-collar workers, they feel that they are not competitive, that they are not flourishing in their communities or individually, and they're correct about that. That doesn't have to translate into anti-elitism, which is a very dangerous term. You know, it's easy to criticize elites. It's hard to get rid of them. If I need open heart surgery, I want an elite doctor. If Donald Trump wants to sue somebody, he wants elite lawyers. You can be guaranteed that he is going to be appointing elite financiers and politicians to his cabinet. So this is a dangerous trope to allow too quickly. There's a difference between the elite and establishment practices. So I would be wary of that. We need the so-called elites, people with real technical expertise, to be working with government to solve the problems of all Americans, including less educated blue-collar workers. That's
Well-
very clear. So let's not go rushing to this trope of it's all about resentment of the elites. I think that's a little too pat, a little too easy.
Let's hesitate about using those general words, but at the same time, the question is whether many of those who opposed Donald Trump throughout the campaign, very dirty campaign, 16 months, be able to support him once he becomes the president, both within his Republican Party and many other social groups. And Ms. Ross, are the most capable and the most globally minded people to be in the administration of Mr. Trump once he, put his list in front of the world?
I hesitate and am uncomfortable with the labels that are used. I agree with my fellow panelists. However, it would be naive, it would be dangerous for us to not recognize that what this campaign and what this election has revealed is a significant and worrisome class divide in this country. We have a significant class divide in this country. We have a group of people who feel that we are moving in the right direction, and those people voted for Hillary Clinton. There are apparently a larger number of people who feel that we are not moving in the right direction and things are not going well. And apparently there are more of those people than we thought. And in order for us to move forward, there has to be a reconciliation between those 2 points of view. I think we would also be naive to not talk about race in the context of this discussion as well. Our country, like the world around it, is changing, where a power structure that had traditionally been held by white, Christian, straight men is changing. We have emerging majorities, we have women, we have people who gleefully identify as gay, lesbian, transgendered, and questioning. Our world and our nation is changing. Those people tend to be more comfortable, from my point of view, with globalization, with a different worldview, with the role of technology, and we have to bridge that divide because we're all Americans. And in order for us to move forward, we have to reconcile.
A huge task in front of you, I have to say. But thank you so much, certainly, for your contribution to the discussion. Lisa Osborne Ross, thank you for being with us. And we'd like to invite Robert Daly. Thank you, ma'am. Robert Daly and Mr. Yang Xiyu still to stay with us for the next round of debate about China-U.S. relations. China was a major talking point during this year's U.S. presidential election. Donald Trump mentioned China dozens of times, to say the least, during the debates. Our panel will discuss how a Trump presidency could affect China-U.S. relations. But first, this background story.
The big powers. China and the U.S. have enjoyed strong bilateral ties. The two nations have steadily deepened their economic, political, and military cooperation since establishing diplomatic relations 37 years ago. Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Barack Obama have met several times to discuss win-win cooperative efforts and ways to improve ties even further. The two leaders reached a consensus on pursuing a new type of bilateral relationship during the 2013 Sunnyland Summit. And President Xi signed a wide range of bilateral agreements during his first state visit to the U.S. in 2015. But Obama's controversial pivot to Asia proved to make further cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region difficult. Increased U.S. Navy patrols in the South China Sea have hurt efforts to resolve regional conflicts. And a planned U.S. missile defense system in South Korea threatens to disrupt the regional balance of power on the Korean peninsula.
The United States need to realize that China has its own interest in stability in the Korean peninsula. So if China's interest was damaged by American measures taken to deal with challenge from DPRK, how can they convince China to work together?
Newly elected Donald Trump says he wants to focus on domestic issues as president. It remains to be seen how his presidency will affect U.S. relations abroad.
And for more on China-U.S. ties, we are once again joined by Mr. Yang Xiyu and also Mr. Robert Daly. Let me start by asking you, Mr. Daly, during his campaign, Mr. Trump repeatedly talked about he is against the globalization and some of the trade mechanism being used today. What would that mean for China-U.S. trade and economic ties once he comes into the office. By the way, that aspect of the relationship has been the fabric that has been holding these two countries together for quite a few decades already.
First, I would like to note that I would actually disagree in whole or in part with a lot of the characterizations in that introductory piece. I'm not sure that's a good description of the state of U.S.-China relations over the past 8 years, and
State
especially
your
in
point.
the past few years. But, well, I think it hasn't all just been win-win. It is far from clear that the United States agreed to build a new model of major power relations, and there are very different views on the South China Sea, the rebalance, the Korean Peninsula. So we've been in a position in which we've cooperated in many ways, as you noted, and climate change was certainly a bright spot. But distrust has obviously been growing between the United States and China. This is part of what Trump inherits, regardless of his attitudes toward globalization. His attitudes toward globalization, I think, like so much of what he said, are really largely unknown. He has taken several different positions. Obviously, he is a worldwide investor. He has been a beneficiary of globalization. He has said that he would impose a 45% tariff on all Chinese imports. This would unquestionably start a trade war and would also be in violation of a number of existing United States agreements. And so we really don't know whether Donald Trump, the practical businessman and deal maker, comes into the White House, or whether Donald Trump, the ideologue and campaigner against globalization, about which he has not been entirely consistent, is going to come into the White House. So this is largely unknown. And his statements about China, again, have been contradictory. They've been all over the map.
Right. And we are also joined now by Ms. Carla Freeman, Executive Director of the Foreign Policy Institute and Associate Director of China Studies at Johns Hopkins University, also based in Washington, D.C. Welcome to our program, Ms. Freeman. This same question to you. Your family, of course, has been very instrumental in U.S.-China trade and economic ties, also academic exchanges. But what do you make of Mr. Trump's earlier campaign rhetorics, and particularly those parts having possible impact on U.S.-China relations? Is he likely to implement it, or is he likely to throw it out the window once he's in the office?
I don't think we know exactly what Donald Trump is going to do as President Trump on China or on foreign policy in general. I think, though, there are some signals that he is going to make a significant break from the past. We're going to have to reassess the relationship with China under a Donald Trump administration. And I think we are going to, as a country, find ourselves facing questions from our partners and allies in the region. It's going to be a bumpy transition, but we have high stakes in the region. We have high military stakes, and of course we have significant economic stakes. And one hopes that those high stakes drive a policy that is more consistent than a radical break from the past.
Mr. Yang, the strategic distrust that both mentioned by the other two guests between China and the United States, that's likely, given our knowledge of Mr. Trump, for now, to deepen or actually lessened once he comes into the office?
Well, for the initial period, for example, the first year of the Trump administration, it will be deepened. And with time going...
So you're expecting a very bumpier
start. Yes, just like the previous president, every president since Carter. The first year, the distrust or mutual suspicions, at least, were pretty high. With time going, with increasing of changes, that will be reduced gradually, and more cooperations, less mutual suspicions. And fundamentally, I think there's, for Chinese appearances, there's always a big gap between what he said in the campaign and what he could do in the presidency. So basically, there's some bumpy road, but there should be some limitation.
There will be some differences, but on certain issues, he has already said something quite definite during his campaign. For example, about some of the international issues like climate change. He said the issue still needs to be further investigated, meaning he doesn't even accept there is something like climate change. China, United States, Mr. Yang, very briefly from you, take pride in cooperating on a deal about about climate change. The climate change conference is going on right now in Paris, around the world. So, what's going to be the next step? International governance is still going to be a cooperative point, or is likely to be a conflicting point now?
Legacy left by Obama will continue in the bilateral relations, say cooperation on the climate change, and also because of the more and more changes between the top level of exchanges between China and U.S. I think the basic stability for the bilateral relations can be kept.
You are always a cautious optimist. I understand that, Mr. Yang. But to you, Mr. Daly, what do you think of it? International cooperation, international governance, the shining point, or becoming the weaker point, briefly?
I think it is likely to get more difficult, and not because of President Trump. I think that President Clinton would have also faced a dynamic in which, within the United States, suspicions about the benefits of China trade are increasing. We see far more calls in Washington for greater use of reciprocity in trade with China, especially as China continues to invest in the United States. Now, often this investment is very welcome at a local level and has been a bit of a bright spot. But now we have members of Congress calling for an expansion of the use of CFIUS reviews and a use of a reciprocal standard. In other words, if a Chinese company is considering buying an American asset, more and more Americans are saying the test should be, not does it threaten American security, but would Americans be allowed to buy the corresponding asset in China? And the answer is usually no.
Right.
So there is broader suspicion of the long-term effects on the United States of Chinese investment, which more and more people see as corrosive, and this is something that President Trump will have to address.
Not to mention the BIT, the bilateral investment treaty, that is still being hotly discussed at this moment. We don't know what's going to happen next under another presidency. Having said that, though, let me go to another important question to you, Ms. Freeman. We understand that there has been congratulatory words expressed by both Russian President Vladimir Putin and also the Chinese President Xi Jinping to your president-elect, Mr. Donald Trump. So, given his campaign rhetorics concerning these two countries, what can we make of a future? Like a new blueprint of the world, or likely to be the same path with some interesting dramatic changes only?
It's a difficult question to answer. If you look at who Donald Trump has surrounded himself with as sources of foreign policy advice, they have very different perspectives and on both China and Russia. But many of them seem to think that the United States could work with China and certainly, with Russia, and certainly that's a perspective that Donald Trump has expressed. Similarly, I think that this is a man who is a deal maker. He's going to look for bilateral agreements with countries. We may not see the kind of protracted processes like the strategic and economic dialogue going on with China that brought the two countries together on so many levels, rather that this may be an issue-to-issue approach to policy. And I think that will be true with Russia as well, where Donald Trump has expressed an interest even in cooperating on Syria. So it's very hard to predict where this is. In some ways, this is a blank slate. And in that sense, it represents some new opportunities, but it is also a very different environment, and in that sense is going to be a potentially dangerous period of transition as countries try to understand how to manage in this new global environment.
It seems our American scholars of China studies have all adopted this opportunity vis-a-vis challenges approach. Let me go back to you for the final words, Mr. Yang. Given so many uncertainties illustrated by our well-respected American guests, is China prepared? How can China be prepared?
Well, uncertainty is the common sense among all peoples, but the uncertainty can be translated in the composition containing both opportunities and challenges. It's up to how China to play and cooperate interaction with the United States.
Everybody should need to learn the Chinese phrase, 危机 is both danger and opportunity all in one. Okay, there we go. Thank you so much, the three of you, for being with us, shedding some important insight on U.S.-China relations to come for the next presidency in the U.S. Carla Freeman, Robert Daly, Yang Xiyu. Really appreciate the three of you for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come, the UN is holding its yearly climate change conference in the Moroccan city. Will world leaders honor their promises to implement difficult environmental reforms, particularly now? You're watching World Insight, coming to you live Monday to Friday every day on CCTV News. Global talks on climate change are underway in the Moroccan city of Marrakech. Representatives of 196 nations have gathered for the COP22 summit to discuss how to implement the Paris Climate Accord. Our panel will talk about the challenges ahead and what's at stake, but first, this background story.
Moving forward on climate change reform. COP22 participants are putting together a detailed rulebook for the Paris Climate Agreement, one that will lay out a step-by-step plan on how to implement the historic accord.
Si nous voulons que les choses avancent,
if we want to achieve success as fast as possible, we must solve the problems with action. It is clear that we must take action, and all the participants should engage actively and take actions as a strategic policy for development.
195 countries signed the Paris Agreement during the COP21 summit in Paris last year. Signatories to the accord agreed to try and keep global temperatures from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels. The accord calls for efforts to reach peak greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible, with each country's progress in cutting emissions subject to review every 5 years. China and the U.S. ratified the Paris Agreement in Hangzhou earlier this year. The two countries account for around 38% of global carbon emissions. China is rolling out a series of bold environmental measures to tackle climate change. Last Friday, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon praised China's efforts to fight global warming.
When it comes to China, I can only say how much grateful we are, not only me, whole international community. Only with China and United States ratifying this, we reached 39%, two countries. It has shown great political impact.
The Paris Accord came into full force just days before the Marrakesh talks. Few nations imagined they would be drawing up detailed plans of how to enforce the plan so soon. Now that the initiative has come into force, the focus is on making sure nations keep their pledges and implement new environmentally sound policies.
For more in-depth discussion on COP22 talks, we have in Beijing Mr. Zhou Zi, who is the Deputy Director General at the National Development and Reform Commission. Welcome, sir. Also joining us from Washington, D.C. in the U.S., Andrew Light, Senior Fellow at the Global Climate Program of the World Resources Institute. Welcome as well. Mr. Light, shall we begin with you by asking you the question related to the result of your presidential election? Mr. Donald Trump, the president-elect, has been a climate change denier. So, under that circumstances, where is the U.S. likely to go if we go into next year?
Well, I think we actually don't really know what Donald Trump's positions are on climate change. And I think we also have to realize that there's a difference between campaigning and governing. I think that one of the things that I noticed in the acceptance speech that Donald Trump gave early this morning in New York was a markedly more measured tone than we saw yesterday on the campaign trail. And so really we're going to be for a little while in a wait and see position to try to understand exactly what his intentions are going to be with respect to both domestic and international policy moving forward.
Mr. Zhou, China, United States worked very hard on this agreement and has been flagship supporters, shall we say, of this accord to call in others' support as well. If this cooperation crumbles, what would that mean?
But certainly I think there must be some change compared to the past cooperation in the new administration, Mr. Trump's administration. But I do think we still have a lot of opportunities and the potential to to kick off new process of cooperation. That's because climate is not only the climate itself. It's a matter of development. It's a matter of infrastructure investment. It's a matter of technology innovation.
Mr. Zhou, if I could lightly point out what you are trying to suggest, seems to me, is that climate change deals likely to be thrown away. Instead, the United States and China will cooperate on other areas that are likely to bring some momentum to jobs and industrial development and upgrading of our economy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so I mean, but certainly, maybe you can say, oh, I deny or I accept the fact of climate change. But anyway, by my knowledge, Mr. Trump also emphasized infrastructure investment in his administration very, very much. I see some overlap there, and then we can explore the opportunity to work together for the two economies, for sustainable development, for air quality, for health.
All right, and of course, Mr. Light, Mr. Trump, when he was giving the success speech earlier this morning, earlier in the early hours, he turned out to be quite a different person, many say, compared to his personalities during the campaign. But what should we expect when issues like this become uncertain for the overall international agreement? And will other members of this agreement follow suit to create more uncertainty, or are they likely to become more closer with one another to ensure that this accord will go ahead in many details?
So
let's have Mr. Light.
Okay. Well, look, I think that to go back to your last question, it's a false dichotomy to say that you can't grow your economy and fight climate change. And I think that's one thing that we've seen in the cooperation between the U.S. and China, which has been so strong the last several years, is a very serious attitude towards trying to do exactly that. I think that other countries around the world see that as well. I think we're seeing serious climate leadership from obviously the EU for some time, India, other parties. It took all countries of the world to come together to form the Paris Climate Agreement. So I think there is strong self-interest in those parties to continue the action they are now. I think that if any major party were to start rolling back a little bit now, then there would be a gap that would be created that other countries would rush in to fill, because this is not just about saving the planet, this is also about creating new energy markets for which there is ample demand. So I think a combination of factors will lead to countries coming together and putting pressure on any party, frankly, that tries to walk back from the commitments made in Paris.
Right, indeed. The climate change phenomenon has been quite an obvious one, shall we say, for many to see in the rest of the world over the years, while the campaigns about awareness of the climate change. 2005, for example, was the warmest year on record, and 2016 is on track to being even warmer, some say. According to the World Meteorological Organization, global warming is creating extreme weather events around the world. Around 2,500 people in West Africa died from drought and famine between the year 2011 and 2012. 1 year later, there are different kinds of hurricanes, like Hurricane Haiyan killed thousands of people in Southeast Asia and causing billions in economic damage. And just last year, over 4,100 people died in a deadly heat wave in India and Pakistan. These are just some sporadic cases indicating the climate change's impact on our world today. So where to go from here? This world event is being held now in the Moroccan city, but the thing is, I'm sure representatives there, Mr. Zhou, are discussing these issues with a lot of uncertainties, just like us here in Beijing.
Yeah, but I think this is a matter of adaptation to climate change. I think, at least from Chinese perspective, we emphasize very much and take a lot of the measures, and will continue to take the measures to adapt to the negative impact of climate change. and by infrastructure, by capacity building, by early warning system, etc., etc. And this is also very important, especially for developing country
But
people.
will that put China on a weaker footing, at least temporarily, when it comes to doing business elsewhere in the world, particularly if the United States do not necessarily going to follow the same deal anymore?
But I think in front of the disaster, the real negative impacts, any government, any leaders, they have to take action on that.
Right. Mr. Light, it is not just the United States political leadership change. It is also in Europe and also many other countries around the world this year, next year. Meanwhile, you also have the United Nations. Its Secretary General has been going to the end of his term. Some suggest it's a very successful term. One of his successes is to work on climate change issues. But with the change of personnel, you know, a lot of things could be changing as well. So, Mr. Light, how important will climate change, this issue itself, for the world, let's just say, for the coming year and the years to come?
Well, listen, I think that the list of facts that you mentioned in your previous question to Mr. Zhou is really sort of is the strongest case for why there is not going to be the ability for leaders to deny the reality of climate change and to back away from the commitments that they have made. The difference between now and the time that we negotiated the Kyoto Protocol and the failure of the United States to join the agreement is that the problem's gotten much worse, just as you mentioned. And so it's going to be, I think at this point, there is going to be very little slack in the system for a number of parties to back down.
Right.
Keep in mind one thing here. The election yesterday was not a referendum on American public attitudes on climate change. We still have 70% of Americans who think that climate change is real and think that something needs to be done about it. And I think that that is going to be something that the next president is going to have to take into account.
Well, we're going to see what's going to happen. Of course, there's been so much debate about integrity and fairness in the overall implementation and planning process for the Paris Accord. We'll see what's going to happen together with the geopolitical changes. Thank you so much. Andrew Light joining us from Washington, D.C. Zoe here with us in Beijing. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the program, visit our website. Just type World Insight CCTV News into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.